Well, welcome to Straight Talk. This is Senator Gerald Neal. This is my weekly Saturday FaceTime, Facebook Live show. I'm very glad that you're able to join us again this year. This week, I want to encourage you to share this as much as possible. As usual, we're going to be partnering with WLOU Radio. We're very glad to have them each week. We have the opportunity not only to do this live on this Zoom platform and stream through Facebook, but we also have this in simulcast at WLOU. So you can go to your radio station, WLOU, your favorite radio station, to hear what we're talking about. And actually, you can offer questions that you may wish to ask with respect to this. So we are very happy to have you here today. And we're going to continue this discussion with our special guests. And we have as our special guest, U.S. Congressman John Yarmuth. He needs no introduction in real life. He's the congressman for the 3rd District. He's well known for his work throughout the community and throughout the nation. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Senator. It's good to be with you.
It's always good to see you. I'll tell you, a lot has been going on. And it's almost hard to know exactly where to start. So much is going on. But I think that what we have is an opportunity maybe to share some information and hopefully get your perspective for the viewing audience. So we're gonna skip around on a lot of things. But first, I want to go back a little bit because people tend to forget that we are still in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. And from where you're sitting, what's your take on it at this stage of the game?
Well, I think I have numerous observations. One is that I think one of the things we're suffering from in the country right now is a very dangerous lack of information. And I'm talking about the scientific community as well as the public. I just don't think that we know enough about this virus to make a lot of good decisions about when, whether we're at a peak, whether we're still in the first phase, whether this thing is mitigating in any way. We don't know. I know for the first couple of months after it presented itself in this country, we didn't know, for instance, how long somebody with no symptoms could be contagious. And it was like, well, we're going to quarantine for 14 days. But how long are you contagious? And some people have now estimated it could be up to 45 days where you're contagious. So again, just the other day, one person from the World Health Organization said it's very difficult to transmit. It's very rare to transmit this if you're asymptomatic. And then they said, well, no, it could be 40% of asymptomatic people could transmit it. So again, I just think we're in very dangerous ground because we don't know enough about this particular virus. But clearly, I think here in Kentucky, we've, relatively speaking, handled this situation pretty well. We've unfortunately lost several hundred people statewide, but we're testing at a pretty good rate. I think we've contained it for the most part here, but in other parts of the country, when people started saying, well, it's not that bad, we'll start going back out. Now they're seeing spurts of cases in Texas and Florida, some other place, Arizona. So it's just a very, very scary thing because, my guess is that we're going to end up, even though this is much more dangerous than the common flu, we're going to end up in this country treating it much like the flu, in that we'll vaccinate. Once the vaccination is available, we'll use that. Not everybody will get vaccinated. There'll still be this virus around. Several thousand people will die every year because of it. But we will be with it. I think we'll have it with us for a long time.
Well, I'll tell you, in the midst of all of this, I saw where one of the representatives of the Trump administration indicated that regardless of what it does, they're not going to shut down anymore. And he says this in the context of what you just referenced across the nation, particularly in Texas and some of these other areas or states that opened up really early, that there's an increase, and then now they are saying it may be worse than the first time around.
Yeah, again, we just don't have enough information. And I know there are a lot of people who are very busy doing research on this virus, not just on a vaccine or treatment, but also just on what this strain does, how it's transmitted. We still don't even know for sure exactly how it's transmitted and how dangerous it is. I was at the vigil for Breonna Taylor last Saturday, and most of the people there had masks on, but not everybody did. And it was very close quarters. And they recommended that I be tested just because of being out among so many people. So I was tested on Thursday. Fortunately, it came back negative. But they're urging everyone who's in these demonstrations and protests to actually go get tested, which I think is smart. But again, we're going to have it with us for a while. And unfortunately, it's had incredibly serious economic impact. Both the health impact and the economic impact has fallen disproportionately on Black Americans and other non-white citizens. And that's a consequence of a lot of things. But it's just one more example of how this nation tilts against people who aren't white.
Well, I want to get into that a little deeper in just a second, but I want to back up just a little bit. I think Governor Beshear has gotten A+ rating in terms of how he's handled it here in Kentucky. Yet we have reopened, and the latest on it is that we have an uptick with respect to infections, at least the detection of infections.
Right. Not a dramatic one, but
right.
A certain one, which I guess is to be expected.
Yeah.
I've only been into a restaurant once since we've reopened. That's been 6 weeks now. So I still think a lot of people are being very, very cautious in what they expose themselves to.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And the whole point is you just can't, you get used to it. You start carrying out your everyday life as usual. It's an invisible type of enemy, so to speak. And after a while, you put your guards down, and then you have people out here that just don't believe it, and they just ignore it and don't understand that those masks, they're saying that universally, those masks work if people would use them. Yeah.
Exactly. And we do know that it is transmitted from spores that come out of your mouth and nose. So if you sneeze, cough, speak, sing, yell, you're putting, and you have the virus, you're putting that virus out there. And the masks help restrain that and protect others. And if everybody, obviously, it may not help you, but it helps others. And if others have it on, it helps you.
And that's the point I'm trying to make. I can't get my mind around why someone would be so nonchalant or disregard their potential for infecting someone, given the nature of the information that we've received universally. That's a tough one for me.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing goes against it. And if you feel sick, the idea that that there are probably several million people in the United States right now who have had the virus or have it, and they're asymptomatic. And if you don't feel bad, you don't think that there's anything to worry about.
Yeah.
And then when you see the president of the United States basically mocking the masks, there's certain people who take their cues from that, and that's unfortunate also.
Well, of course, now the president of the United States is a whole discussion in and of itself.
Oh, yes,
but I will say something. I'm talking to you about this subject matter, and you just put me on notice that I've been down there in those demonstrations. I've been in all kinds of groups. I'm going to get retested. I'm going to do that. It's going to be the first thing on my agenda. Thank you for putting that in my head. And I'm going to encourage everyone else down there to do something.
It's easy. And I was tested back in March because I was at an event where I was sitting right next to somebody who was positive, who turned out to be. The first test I got was was one where it feels like they're sticking the swab into your brain. And it's,
I know that one.
it's very, very uncomfortable.
It is.
The one they're doing now is not nearly as painful. I mean, you might sneeze afterwards and your nose might run, but it's just momentary discomfort and not very bad. So it's a lot easier than the first tests were reported to be.
Well, I want you to know I've had 2 already, so I know exactly what you're talking about. So I'm looking forward to the 3rd test. Well, look, you raised the issue, and I think you're exactly right. We have this issue of disparities, right? In this instance, in this conversation, we're talking about health disparities that have been revealed to some, but known by others since the inception of this country and the advent of individuals being enslaved in this country.
Yeah, and so much of this is, again, is long in the making. You're right. It's the entire history of this country. It's a system that was set up for whites to benefit, and in many cases at the cost of freedom and liberty and happiness for non-whites. And we see it it's a function of economics, it's a function of healthcare, availability of healthcare, it's a function of environment. We know, for instance, that a lot of people in West Louisville have disproportionate respiratory issues, asthma and so forth, and living in proximity to heavy industrial chemical facilities. All of that is tied together and results in a vulnerability among Black citizens to this particular virus. And because again, if you have a pre-existing condition like asthma or COPD or something, anything that you have which weakens your immune system and can contribute to your being more vulnerable and to having a worse outcome if you catch the virus. So this is economic, it's educational, it's again environmental, it's medical, and all of those things are related, as you well know, and you've been a champion in trying to level the field for a long time. And I think one of the most positive aspects of this whole last 3 months is the outpouring of support for Black Lives Matter from white people, and particularly young people who understand the system is screwy.
Let me stick a pin in that, because I think that's worthy of a whole segment in discussion. I want to wrap up something here, though. I want to go back, because a lot of people probably don't know what you do. I mean, you serve on committees at the national level. Exactly what do you do?
Well, so my job has basically 3 elements to it. One is to help write legislation. That's the constitutional job description of a member of Congress. The second is to help my constituents navigate the federal government bureaucracy when it is not responsive to them. And that's a huge part of our work on a daily basis. It's helping citizens with everything from getting a passport renewed to getting their Social Security, disability payments, and so forth. The list goes on and on. And then the third part of my job is I think of it as being a connector, is to make people believe and understand that they have a connection to their federal government, and that's me. And whether there's something they don't like, whether there's something they like, whether whatever it may be, and that's kind of, and you know this well because you're out in all the community. That's one of the most important parts of this job, is being accessible to your constituents and being open to listen to what they have to say. And that's not in the job description in the Constitution, but I think it's the most important part of the job.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I can testify that you've done that job well, because you highly respected for the work and your sincerity and your timeliness in dealing with many of these issues. And even this commentary we're having now revealing your awareness. As some people say, you apparently awoke. so my
Well, let me tell you, Gerald, my mother, who died a couple of years ago, the ripe age of 91, but when she was a much younger woman, she was one of the first members of the Louisville Jefferson County Human Rights Commission. And so I had a good grounding in people who were concerned, who understood the unfairness of our society and the injustices and worked to correct them. So I owe a lot of that sensitivity to her.
Good training, right?
Yep.
So
it's always the mother. It's always the mother.
Understood. So there's you chair a committee.
Yes, I'm chairman of the House
Committee.
House Budget Committee. It's a great gig.
Yeah.
And our primary responsibility is to produce a budget, which has been very, very difficult over the last 10, 12 years for both parties. But we didn't produce a budget this year. We produced what we call top line numbers. That was my role to lead that discussion. And that allows the appropriators to actually assign dollar amounts to different programs. But we come up with the overall spending limits. And then what we also have done is in the budget committee is we've kind of reimagined the committee as the oversight committee on the budget. And which basically means we're the oversight committee for the taxpayers. So we've held hearings on, for instance, immigration policy and how that affects the budget. We're holding one on artificial intelligence and how that will affect the budget going forward. We actually held a hearing back in February, kind of very presciently, on the need for automatic stabilizers in case of a recession. So the idea being that when economic growth stops, or when there's an economic decline, a recession or depression, that certain federal programs kick in automatically. So food stamps increase, Medicaid contributions to states increase, unemployment insurance increases automatically. So you don't have to get into a political fight anytime there's an economic downturn. So and so that was kind of interesting. We held that in February, and then all of a sudden, 2 months later, we're in a recession, and we're fighting now on those very same things, whether we can continue unemployment and uninsurance supplements and so forth. So it's that type of thing we're doing, and we're having very important discussions and hearings on things that affect the budget every day.
Well, I would imagine that one of the subjects or something that you all would be dealing with is the impact of COVID and the impact it's had on cities and states and various localities, and the resistance, it appears, from Mitch McConnell in terms of doing what would seem to be the obvious. What's your take on this?
Well,
and for those who don't know, Mitch McConnell is a senator in the state of Kentucky.
Yes, he is one of our United States senators, but he also happens to be the majority leader of the Senate. So he is solely responsible for what comes to the floor of the Senate to be passed. So essentially, nothing can even have a chance to be enacted into law unless Mitch gives it the go-ahead. We passed several weeks ago what we call the HEROES Act. It was a piece of legislation, $3 trillion, a lot of money, to deal with the economics of the COVID crisis. About $1 trillion of that, slightly less than $1 trillion, would go to states and state and local governments whose budgets have been decimated by this economic downturn. So you can imagine, with unemployment the way it is, that there are much fewer income tax revenues in states like ours that have income tax. People aren't out spending money, so the sales tax revenues are down. Not every state has sales tax, but we have both sales and income tax. And then, in some cases like Louisville, we have an occupational tax that's down because employment's down, and too many people are out of work, and we can't enhance our revenue unilaterally. We have to, the state has to give us permission to do that, and they have not. So we're facing these huge gaps. The city's already laid off a lot of people. There have been 500,000 teachers laid off across the country because state governments have not had the revenue to keep paying them. That's just disastrous. And we're going to start laying off police officers and a lot of other vital public employees because of this loss of revenue at the state and local government. So what we said was the federal government needs to step up. This wasn't mismanagement on the part of any state or any local government. This was a national economic crisis that is causing severe hardship. So
let me get this straight. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let me make this straight. Kentucky is having fiscal problems as a result of a national emergency. It stepped up to the plate to protect its citizens as other states have done in varying degrees. It has suffered a deficit fiscally as a result of it. And then our senator, Senator McConnell, who's in a pivotal role into whether or not we will be made whole to protect the security further in terms of the operations of our cities and our state government, is refusing to benefit Kentucky, Louisville, or the rest of Kentucky in that regard. Is that what I'm hearing here?
That's exactly right. Now, I'm not going to defend Mitch. I think, but I think what Mitch is doing right now is trying to buy time so he can figure out what his members, his Republican members in the Senate would be willing to vote for, and what the president would be willing to sign. This is a very unusual situation in which the party that has the White House and the party that's in the majority in one of the houses of Congress aren't usually on the same page. So I think that's what Mitch has been doing, is trying to buy time. On the other hand, we've now gone, again, in a period when every day really matters. We've gone for a period of weeks where there's been not one negotiation that I'm aware of, and I've asked our leadership if they've been negotiating and the staffs haven't. So we're losing a lot of time. As of the end of July, right now the federal government has a $600 per week unemployment supplement for every person who's unemployed. That expires on July 31st. The act that we passed, the HEROES Act we passed in the House, would extend that for 6 months. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I think that's too long, and with many people, they're making now off unemployment more than they made in their jobs. And there is a disincentive for some people to go back to work. So we have to ratchet it down, but still, that's a conversation we want to have now and figure it out now, not wait till till July 30th, and then be up against the gun and making hasty and bad decisions. So
I'll take. Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
That's what I fault Mitch for. Is everything with him is, we don't care what the Democrats do. We're going to do our own thing. Well, ultimately, they have to deal with us. It has to pass, whatever it is, has to pass both the House and Senate. Why not try and come together as we did with the CARES Act, which was the last big piece of COVID-related legislation we did, and we have on budget things and so forth. We have to work together, and to take the position that everything we do is basically dead on arrival, or if we took that position, everything the Senate did is dead on arrival, then we've got a dysfunctional government. And
we got more than a dysfunctional government. We have a leadership crisis here, from my perspective.
We absolutely do.
I mean, at some point you got to stand up, and you have to assert yourself and not just be reactive. And the other thing is, I guess I put you in a spot here because I'm gonna trust your judgment. I mean, you're there, you're dealing with it, and I know how it is when I'm dealing in the arena I'm dealing in. Some people don't understand the movement. There's a lot of movement, to get to from A to Z. But when Mitch makes comments like, "Well, you ought to go bankrupt. You ought to bankrupt this thing. The state ought to bankrupt," and all this stuff. is that helpful? I mean, the rhetoric that he's employing, regardless of his intentions or his positioning, is, to me, is just totally out of bounds.
Well, it was not only insulting, and Mitch has taken, understandably and justifiably, a lot of heat over that. And I know he wishes he hadn't said it, but also it was very ignorant, because the problem with, you're a lawyer, what bankruptcy is for is to give yourself protection from your creditors. Well, who are the creditors of the state?
Right.
The state employees,
Exactly.
the citizens. So you wouldn't be accomplishing anything. Declaring bankruptcy wouldn't bring in more money to help you pay teachers and all the other people the state pays.
Well, I don't know about you, and you don't have to respond to this, but I can't tell you the depths of disappointment I have with Mitch McConnell. And I got to tell you, I'm ambivalent about our other senator, Rand Paul. I mean, to stand up and to stifle the advancing of the anti-lynching bill, over some tech or some, any kind of exception that he thinks might happen. I mean, that's amazing to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can argue whether he had a valid point or not. I mean, it wasn't a totally stupid point. But the point is, he's one person, and he held up a bill that the other 99 members of the Senate were prepared to vote for.
Yeah.
Now, that's partially a problem with the rules of the Senate, that he can hold that up. But any responsible legislator would say, okay, I'll try to amend it. If the amendment fails, then I can vote it up or down. But I'm not going to keep my 99 colleagues from voting for something that they're for.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Smacks of hubris to me, but we'll see. let me move on a little bit, because we're in the midst of a very, very unique period. I'm gonna tell you, I was active in the civil rights movement, probably every movement since then, but I don't think I've quite seen anything like I'm looking at right now. We're talking about not only the protests that are taking place in Louisville, the protests that are taking place across the country, but my goodness, around the world, we have these protests, and they're interconnected. And the other thing is that when I look at who's protesting, I mean, I expect our youth to step up. It's always been the youth that have stepped up, right? But my goodness, the diversity in that youth, I'm telling you, to me, it gives me a little hope about what may be possible. What's your take on that?
I agree totally, Gerald. Jesse Jackson was in town the other day, last weekend, and I had the opportunity to talk with him briefly, and he said the same thing. He said he is more optimistic now than he's been in his entire life in this effort, because of that very thing. Because these are young people. They're more whites than blacks out there protesting, and it's a recognition that the system needs overhauling. And it's not just the police system. We know that we've got problems in policing across the country that we need to correct. But this is essentially the system is broken, and the system is rigged against a lot of people. There isn't equal opportunity in this country. And you've got a lot of white kids who are graduating from college now, or graduating from high school, and they're looking out and saying, "Hell, what are my prospects?" And they're seeing the same kind of bleak future that that blacks have seen for basically all time. And so that's a good recipe for getting a change.
Well, I'm gonna tell you something. My son Brandon, who actually interned in your office when he's at University of Louisville, he lives in New York now. I don't know if you're aware of that. He lives in New York, and he's doing some associate producing at Juilliard and so forth. He's back home working virtually, and he's educating me, right? And he's telling me, well, Dad, A, B, C, D, and E, this, what's happening now is like a perfect storm. You have this COVID piece. You have this piece where people do not know, they have this uncertainty about their future. We have folks that understand and do not look at race the way older folks have lived and looked at race as well, that they don't see any reasonableness in that type of approach or how you relate to another human being. He said, all of this is coming together. I think that's what's making this moment special. I had not thought of it that way initially.
Oh, well, but look what you're seeing around the country. Statues of Confederate heroes toppling everywhere. Robert E.
Yes.
Lee, Robert E. Lee in Virginia. That statue is gone. You're seeing, we finally got Jefferson Davis's statue out of the Capitol in Frankfurt. People have been trying to do that for many, many years.
Let me tell you, I've been in the middle of those struggles. I've been in over at least 3, and the governor speaks, and 7 days later, it's gone. Amazing.
NASCAR banning Confederate flags.
Wow. NASCAR.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're seeing not just a very unprecedented protest and protesters, but you're also seeing a very rapid understanding on the part of corporate America and the sports establishment. I mean, here's the Goodell, the NFL commissioner, basically exonerating Colin Kaepernick, saying, everybody is going to kneel.
Yeah. I got one for you. John. Starbucks said that their employees couldn't wear Black Lives Matters t-shirts and then reversed itself.
Yeah, in about 24 hours. It didn't take
exactly.
So again, the entire country's getting woke real fast.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna tell you, that gets into assessing exactly what's going on. I think part of the problem, I think you will agree that, I'll say all the time, I said, really, this is not a black problem. This is a white problem. And the question in my mind is, I'm convinced that the vast majority of the people in this country are people of goodwill. I think the vast majority of people in this country are concerned about their neighbor, their community. And I know we all are fashioned by the way we've been socialized on questions of race. So I understand that to a degree, but the silence of people of goodwill is what disturbs me. Because to me, that's like being complicit. Or it's like saying, I'm taking advantage of the situation, even though I know it's rotten for somebody else, African Americans as an example in this community. What are you seeing in that arena? Do you see a change in that? And I'm talking about people in power. I'm talking about your neighbors. I'm talking about people that you really know that you have a question about. Maybe they should be opening their minds up a little bit, or maybe they have their minds open and they should be asserting themselves a little bit.
Well, I still think, particularly with our generation, and I think we've got a ways to go, but also I don't think it really matters what our generation does right now. This is the millennials and Generation X, and
they're driving it.
They're going to be our next group of leaders, and they're getting in the right place very quickly. Most of them already were, because most of them grew up in diversity and with diversity, and they never thought the way our generation. They'd never been conditioned to think the way our generation was.
But John, I thought that when I was in the civil rights movement, when I was involved in the Black Power movement, I said, we're turning a corner. Our generation's on the move. But guess what? The policymakers are the ones that are going to put into place the ability to change the systemic deficits we have or not. And they are guys like you and me. Right. And that's what happens now is what's going to resonate 10 years from now. So I'm just wondering if, give me hope, John. I mean, is our generation sufficiently engaged in understanding that silence is not sufficient here, that we do have a systemic problem that we must all take ownership for changing?
Many are, but not enough are. I'll put it that way. Yeah. And again, going back to presidential leadership, we have a leader. A lot of people are saying this, and I hate to say it, and I'd love to hear your opinion. A lot of people say there was a downside to having Barack Obama as president, that it allowed us to believe that we had solved everything, first of all, and it created a pushback with those people who were conditioned to not be receptive to a different world. So, and then we got on top of that, an overt racist, and he surfaced all of this stuff, and from Charlottesville till now has remained silent and has refused to provide leadership where it would be really, really helpful. And I'm hoping that he's gone in January, and Joe Biden, because Joe Biden has the biggest heart, I think, of anybody I've ever met in politics. And he will be a different type of leader from that generation, I believe. So, again, I'm very hopeful, particularly because of the young people who are out there and who seem committed for the long haul.
Oh, I believe they are. I believe they're committed for the long haul. I'll tell you, I have not seen this. And then the other thing that's happening too is not just the young people. What's happening also that I'm observing is that their protest is sustained, the young folks. But I also see others, even of my generation and behind me, doing their thing in different locations around the city, for instance, as an example, every single day, not just in Jefferson Park, but all around in churches and various other venues. So I think it's important. But let me get back to this point you made a few minutes ago. That I think is very important. I think that it's predictable. It's predictable the pushback on Barack Obama. You say, in fact, every time we've made a gain, my observation is every time we've made a gain, if it was a great society, there was a pushback on the great society. If there was something called affirmative action, there was a big pushback on affirmative action. So here comes this guy that you couldn't fault for anything. He was intelligent, he was good looking, he even plays basketball in his spare time, right? But he was a scholar at the University of Chicago and knew constitutional law. I mean, how perfect can you get for someone to lead and to be so knowledgeable? Yet the pushback that has come back toward him is predictable, and there is a pushback as it relates to his being president.
Right.
I believe.
And I was and still am one of the biggest supporters of Barack Obama around. I adore him. I have much respect for him and much affection. But he did not use his presidency to lead on civil rights. Yeah. He showed up when he had to show up, and he did the right thing and said the right thing. But he basically tried to avoid being pushy. Yeah. I observed that. I've observed that in his first term, but I think he sort of, toward the second half of his second term, I seem to see a new assertive Barack Obama. Would you say? Yeah, absolutely, a little bit. That happens. But, and I certainly understood why he did it. He was in a unique position. Tell us why. Tell us why. Elucidate. Tell us. Yeah, well, when you're the first Black president, you're going to be very, very sensitive to being seen as somebody who thinks of himself as a Black president. Yeah. Well, let me weigh in on that, John. Yeah. Let me weigh in. By the way, Gerald, I have to go in a minute. Sure. So we can wrap up. Okay, we're gonna do that for hours, and I'd love to do it again, but we're gonna do that, and I'm gonna hold you to it because I'm gonna get you back. Okay? So look here, we are gonna wrap it up. Just on that note, I just have one thing I'd like you to speak to, and we're done. Voting does make a difference, and I think Trump is an example of that. If you just comment on that, we'll wrap it up. Absolutely. Donald Trump is president because a lot of people didn't think it was necessary for them to vote. Yeah. A lot of people thought Hillary Clinton was a cinch to win, so they didn't go out and vote. A lot of people were kind of lukewarm on Hillary Clinton and didn't go out to vote. And that's why she lost Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan by a very small margin. We can't let that happen this time, right? The good news is virtually everywhere across the country, Democratic participation in primaries has been off the charts, record levels. Even in Georgia last week, when they had enormous problems with voting, they still turned out in record numbers. So I think the anti-Trump voter in this country is ready to go. We'll be ready in November. They're going to try pull every trick they can to suppress the vote. I made the statement the other day that whatever the DNC was thinking about spending for lawyers to combat voter suppression, they ought to triple it because we're going to have a lot of fights. But voting isn't, we have a chance to beat Mitch McConnell here. But everybody who doesn't want Mitch McConnell to return has to turn out and vote. So it's critically important. Matt Bevin became governor of Kentucky because people didn't think they had to turn out to vote because they didn't think he had any chance of winning. So whatever the polls say, just because Joe Biden's ahead by 10 or 12 points doesn't mean people can stay home.
Well,
and every race matters. It's not just president. It's not just senator. It's not just congressman. It's state senators, state house members, school board members, metro council members. As a matter of fact, you can make an argument that those lesser races, state legislature, metro council, they affect people's lives on a daily basis much more than who's in Congress. So everybody needs to get out and everybody needs to vote in every race.
Well, let me say this. First of all, I was looking to have you about a half an hour, and you're so gracious to let me have you for 45 minutes. So I appreciate that. We're going to want to get you back. I want to thank you very much for spending this time and sharing with our audience. We're going to continue this discussion when you go offline right here. But please keep up the good work. I trust that's what will be done. And do the right thing. I know you will. God bless you.
Great to be with you. Bless you too.
All right. So you've heard it. You've heard it from John Yarmuth. John Yarmuth, we all know him. We all respect his work. We know that he has been a fighter and on the front line since how long? Almost forever, it sounds like. He's raised a number of issues here, or he spoke to a number of these issues, particularly this piece in terms of the disparate impact of not just in the health areas, but in environmental areas, in criminal law enforcement areas, in the economic arena, you name it, there is a disparate impact as it relates to African Americans in the United States of America. And it's rooted in slavery. And it has been institutionalized through a period of time. Post-Civil War, when efforts were made to advance, let's think, there never was a handing over of the 40 acres and a mule. So we knew there was a deficit from the very beginning. We knew that labor that was invested on the front end never was compensated for in any way that was adequate, or in fact, any way at all. And that's why you hear people say, hey, isn't reparations justified? For some people, that seems like a wild statement. Reparations, what do you mean? I didn't do anything. That was done back in 18 something or before. But the fact of the matter is that society at this moment is not just a product of the moment, it's a product of our history, and it projects into the future. We all have an obligation and responsibility to that history and to that future, and particularly right now. So if you really begin to look at it, and I've been looking at this issue regarding reparations, how that's done and how it should be done is another discussion. But just the concept, just the discussion of, wait a minute, you took all of this historically, yet you feel there's no obligation to pay for what you took. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up to me. I think we're going to have a conversation going forward, and we're going to explore that conversation in the very near future. And I hope you're going to look in for that. But these disparate impacts that we're talking about are manifest today. They're manifest in law enforcement. And even though there are those who will say that the vast majority of our officers are good people doing their job and just as we would expect them to do so, the reality is that there's a lot that's wrong with how we look at a police force and how it operates in various communities, including Louisville, including Minneapolis, for sure, including, you name the city yourself. The fact of the matter is that there's an imbalance, if you really study this, in terms of what we give to those who are employees. They train and paid to do a particular type of job. It takes a certain type of leadership, a certain type of person to do that. Yet we give them protections that seem unwarranted to me. We're going to explore that in the future. That doesn't mean we're against police. I have great friends who are police. If somebody breaks into my home, who am I going to call? The police. But also, if their actions engender a distrust in the community, if their actions create, not only that, undermines their legitimacy in a community, such as when an officer does what they did to George Floyd, or the questions that have been raised that are clearly prevalent in the case of Breonna Taylor and her death, or even the issues that led to the killing of David McAtee. I mean, we could go on and on and on. We can go back in history, but not only that, we can look at it today. If we look at it today, since Breonna Taylor, that tragedy, that unspeakable tragedy, guess what? Tragedy after tragedy after tragedy has been happening as we move forward, even from that moment. And they will continue in the future unless we change the systemic operations of our police department. We know that there are problems there. And just those who protect and serve, reacting like, wait a minute, I'm being unfairly treated. No, you work for us. It's not a matter of you being unfairly treated. You work for us, and you are subject to work for us the way we ask you to, the way we employ you to do that, and not to be an occupier in the community, but a guardian and protector in the community. That means you don't abuse the people, even the ones that violate the rules. You don't abuse them. You don't use excessive force. You don't use tactics that calculated to kill. You don't use those things that will exacerbate the situation, as opposed to trying to calm things down and approach it a different way. We need to look at this thing very, very differently, and we need to be open to doing that. You know, somebody raised that flag of the Black Lives Matters, and somebody said, you know, let's defund the police department. And people recoiled, some people recoiled. Then when you begin to understand what that meant, it said, well, let's reimagine what safety looks like in our community. Why don't we reimagine, or let's take another look at exactly what are the components that are necessary to eliminate, or at least minimize, these negative unintended outcomes. What is wrong with that? That's got to be right. That's got to be what intelligent people would do. And I think at the end of the day, even those that are locked into their own prejudices, they're locked into their own positions. They think of, you know, I'm over here and you over there. I play for this team, you play for that team. They back up just for a moment and have a real human discussion, have a real reasonable discussion, then what that grants us is possibility. So what is happening now that allows us to even go there? Protests. You see, protests comes out of incongruent situations that you live in. It comes out of a feeling that this is wrong. It's a feeling that this injustice can't continue. Enough is enough. So what we have to do, because our voices are not being heard, because we're going from day to day doing the same thing, and enough is enough. And then there's a George Floyd or Breonna Taylor and others, then we say, no, that's it. No, we demand change. Well, that's a human reaction. In fact, our country was founded on protests. So those who feel like those who are out in the street protesting injustice that you know is injustice, you know it, it's injustice, then you better think again. That's not what we're really about in this country. They are exercising exactly what this country is about. And that is part of the process of making this a more perfect union, because the union is definitely not perfect. It needs work on, and we need to all be in this together. Now, I spoke earlier about I was very encouraged about what was going on, what I'm observing in the street. Yes, violence, some people, what they'll do is some small group or some intentional group will go out there and create some violence, or some ignorant group even, but it's always a small group. We've already determined that. But some people will take that to discount the original basis of the protest. They're making a mistake, because I don't think this protest is going away. Something new is going on. Something new is going on. And I think it's going to benefit all of us. Our obligation and our responsibility, from my view, from my perspective, is that we need to take advantage of that. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be in the street. That doesn't mean everybody even has the sentiment or the temperament to be in the street. That doesn't mean that you're going to lead everything that happens. It's not going to happen. But it does mean that everyone can play a role. That means every single one of us, white and black, can play a role to make this better for everyone. And that's what it's really about. This is not just about, look, we've done wrong to black folks and we got to get this thing right and we got to do justice. Oh yes, we have to do that. Don't get me wrong. But it's also about white folks. Because as I mentioned earlier, this is really not a black problem, other than the outcome for many blacks that we live in. But this is a white problem. It's discount the ones who are ignorant and racist to the core and wish you no good in this society because of your color or because of your history or because of who you affiliate with. I'm talking about people of goodwill. I'm talking about white people of goodwill. They need to step up. They need to step up. This is the moment. This is a moment where we can get this done. Why would we not get this done? Because it makes it uncomfortable, because we don't want our neighbors to think that we don't agree with their reticence to participate in dealing with issues of justice. Come on, that's not a good enough reason. Is it because you're comfortable, because you get the benefit of a society that's been tilted your way? No, that's not good enough. It's going to still tilt your way. You already got your gain. You already got your foundation. You ought to be happy with that and be blessed. But that puts another responsibility on you from my perspective. And the opportunity is here. So as I and others across this country reach out their hands, to say, hey, why don't we sit down and reimagine how we are proceeding, not just in law enforcement, but how we do healthcare in this community, this Commonwealth era community. How do we deal with environmental problems where people live in the shadows of not toxic chemicals that come out of these plants? You can't sweep that under the rug. Human beings are being affected by that. We have to deal with that. How are we going to do this, and how are we going to deal with our criminal justice system? So some shout, some think, but all must act. All have an opportunity, and we shall not be losing that opportunity, because history will not be kind to you or to me if we sit down and not take advantage of this situation. So I'm going to sign off now, because I think that you get the point. We had Congressman John Yarmuth. You're going to see in the near future, in the week coming, a interview that I had with U.S. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. Very interesting exchange that I had with him. It was very invigorating. So when I put Congressman Yarmuth and the response that I got from Senator Booker together, it gives me hope that there's still good leadership out there. There are people with the energy and the commitment to make positive change for us all. So having said that, I want you to share this. Share this as far and wide as you can. In fact, make your own video and you share that as well, because we have to begin to talk to each other We got to begin to express ourselves. We can't just sit back, and we got to join together, white and black together. That sounds like the days of the civil rights movement. But Lord, look, the opportunity is here. People of goodwill are here. We can do that. So this is State Senator Gerald Neal from Straight Talk. And you know, I always say, do the right thing. Thank you for joining.